I serve as the assistant superintendent with Washington Township Schools, and I'm pleased to be with you this evening. I know just coming from a track meet in Fishers, it's a beautiful evening outside, and it's dinner time. So, people could be wanting to be outside enjoying barbecues instead, but we're here together, and so I just want to make sure I say how much I appreciate everyone joining us. If you don't know, Washington Township has a district strategic plan where we have made a priority for our school system to strengthen our partnerships with our students, all students, as well as strengthening our partnerships with all of our families. And in Washington Township schools, we have a large population of students representative of the Jewish community. We have the JCC, which is an outstanding resource right here in Washington Township schools. And so we're excited to engage this evening and learn more about the JCRC. And we thank you for being here this evening and preparing and sponsoring some content for us to engage with and learn about this evening. And then I also know at the conclusion, there's a little bit of time for some Q&A in relation to that. And so all of this, again, is in respect and in honor of Jewish American Heritage Month. And so we just, again, appreciate our community resources coming together. And in this case, the JCRC, with wanting to put together some content for us to learn more about the organization, to learn more about Jewish heritage, and honor and fulfillment of joy in working with our students representative here this evening. And so thank you again, everyone, for being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and Lindsey.
First, I want to note, are we recording? Yes, okay, so I just want to make that note. Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. My name is Lindsey Mintz, and I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council in Indianapolis, and I'm joined by Aaron Welcher, who is the JCRC's Communications and Advocacy Associate. It looks like I'm going to be joined by a couple of my dogs as well in and out of the evening, so please excuse working from home. So thank you to Washington Township for inviting us to participate in this series. It is Jewish American Heritage Month. It is also Asian American Pacific Islander Month. There is no shortage of communities that are honored at different times of the year, and we're really delighted that Washington Township thought to extend an invitation to the Jewish community to sort of introduce ourselves, to talk about the Central Indiana Jewish community, and also to talk about the things that we are concerned with. It's not just a one-way conversation. Hopefully, we do have a presentation at the outset, and then we'll open it up for Q&A and a panel discussion. But Aaron and I are going to present a few slides for the first 20 minutes or so. If we were in person at a diversity fair, we would have fun games, some fun food to try. It would feel a little bit more joyous. We are doing this obviously by Zoom, and the world is going on around us. And when we're invited to sort of share what's on the Jewish community's mind, what are we concerned with, and what can the community at large know about us, in order to help the Jewish community feel seen and included, we find our way into conversations around anti-Semitism. And so it won't all be joy in tonight's conversation, but these are important conversations to have. So with that, we are going to cover, there we go. We're going to cover quite a few things tonight. First, we're just going to say a quick word about JCRC, give a 101. Every single one of these slides would merit, a graduate degree and a very lengthy conversation. So At the end of this, if you feel like it wasn't enough time, we went too quickly, you're right. But we wanted to touch on lots of things. So we'll introduce Judaism, Jewish identity, give you a sense of who the Jewish community is in sort of north central in the Washington Township area. And then we are going to talk about anti-Semitism. And, when we first said yes to this invitation, there was not a conflict unfolding halfway around the world. And so even without the conflict, we would have talked about the Jewish community's connection to Israel. We are going to spend a little bit of time talking about how young Jews in particular are navigating this really difficult moment for many communities. And then we'll talk about resources and what you can do and open it up for our panel discussion. JCRC, I've been the director of JCRC for almost 10 years and a professional in the Jewish community for almost 20, and I really love the work of JCRC. There are many Jewish organizations and synagogues, which I'll mention in a minute, but JCRC, a lot of those organizations emerged when Jews came to central Indiana, which was the middle of the 19th century. Jews have been living in Indiana, and so organizations emerged as soon as Jews arrived, but it wasn't until about 100 years later that the JCRC was established by the Jewish community, and it was established the Holocaust in 1942 when the community recognized that for all of the ways we were serving ourselves and engaging in society at large, we had not created a single place where the breadth of the Jewish community would come together to collectively voice our concerns to the community at large. So at the very core of our mission is safeguarding Jews, which is why we're going to be talking about anti-Semitism in a few minutes. And we do that through education and relationship building, and through going out and meeting people from different communities, different faith communities, ethnic communities. We understand that as a small minority community, we can't expect everybody to have met somebody Jewish or know somebody Jewish. And so that's part of what JCRC does, is things like this, where we introduce ourselves to the community at large. And by doing so, we break down stereotypes. When you know someone, they are no longer the other. And when you work together in common cause, on coalitions, on issues of shared concern and importance, then you build real relationships, which allow you then to navigate when things are difficult or when there's a difference of opinion between communities. So we've had a presence in the halls of government for close to 40 years. And you'll see that I'll pull out some stats from a survey that we did recently, give you an idea of where the Jewish community is on some domestic policy issues. And ultimately, this idea of promoting an American society that is just democratic and pluralistic, a lot of our work, and again, there are Jewish organizations that do all sorts of things. For JCRC, our work is focused on making sure that society around us is healthy, educated, fed, housed, employed, safe. We know that that's not only good for us as Jews, as members of society, but when societies historically have not been those things, unfortunately, the attention turns to find a scapegoat. And that's often the Jewish community. So it's in the Jewish community's interest that everybody around us recognize the strength of a diverse community and a pluralistic community. Very quickly, obviously there are people who spend their entire lives studying the Jewish people, are members of clergy. I'm going to do it in one slide. And the question that is always asked is, is Judaism a religion? Are Jews a people? Are Jews an ethnicity? And of course, the answer is yes to all of them. But really quickly, Judaism was the first monotheistic faith. I've just thrown up a couple images to give you a sense of some of the symbols that you would most often see or associate with the Jewish community. The Hebrew Bible is the Torah. This is often referred to as the Old Testament by members of the Christian community. Jews refer to it as the Hebrew Bible. And our history and the liturgy throughout the written and oral law and stories that we tell about our earliest experiences are tied through the Hebrew language and are often tied to the experience the Israelites had in the land of Israel, in our ancestral homeland, in the biblical land of Israel. A synagogue is a Jewish house of worship, and religious leaders are called cantors and rabbis. We're going to talk about the Jewish calendar later on, but just make a note that yes, dates do change. That's why it's hard to ever know when is Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. And all Jewish holidays begin at sunset and go to the next sunset. And observances, like in every community, in every faith community, it's a wide range. I mean, if you take anything away from tonight's conversation, it should be that the Jewish community is diverse in many ways, and that includes in our observances and religious practices. Aaron, you're up.
Hi. And so this is a great focus, is that we're not just diverse in our religious practices, but also in our identities. And especially there are many Jews with many multifaceted identities. As you can see, this is just a small kind of sampling of different people who are Jewish. And so we work at JCRC to really uplift various diversity within the Jewish community as well. You have, this is where it always is interesting with Jewish American Heritage Month, because there isn't necessarily one sort of Jewish American heritage. You have Jews who are living here in America now, whose family have a long history of being in the country of India. You have Jews who are from Eastern Europe, Jews who are from Spain, Jews who are from the Middle East, and Jews from everywhere else. And then you also have Jews who identify as LGBTQ+, Jews who are from interfaith or families that one parent's Jewish and one parent isn't. And so it's really important that as we explore Jewish Heritage Month, that we're also exploring those intersection of identities within the Jewish community. And as Lindsey mentioned, and we will share the link later, there's also Jews who are Asian Pacific American Islander. And so in the last couple of months after obviously the tragedy and hate crimes generally happening towards Asian American Pacific Islanders, we've also been working to uplift narratives within the Jewish community that really showcase these identities too. So this is how this side really looks at both just the Jewish population generally in the Indianapolis area, and then some different demographics about households. And these results come from the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis's community survey from 2017. This was a really large scale scientific survey that our community participated in for the first time since I think the 1930s. So we really learned a lot about our community. And one of the biggest takeaways is actually our community is a lot younger than a lot of the other Jewish communities that have done the similar survey. As you can see from the map, that there's kind of three different areas that our population is broken up into. You have the North Core, which is the Carmel Fishers area. You have the core area, which is that central plain, and that's where North Central and Washington Township falls into place. That's also where traditionally the Jewish community has really set its roots over the for a long time. So when you think of the JCC, Bethel Zedek, Indianapolis Hebrew Congregation, and those different agencies, they all sit within that core. And then south of core is where you get into more of downtown and the southern part of Indianapolis. And it's really interesting because at that time, I think that there were a lot of Jews just younger Jews starting to really move into that core, that south of core area as downtown has been built up. So it'd be interesting just to see how, if it's changed number wise of how many Jews live in south of core. As you can see, one thing that's really important, I think, especially as parents, teachers, educators, is this Jewish ritual graphic. It shows that while everyone practices differently, that that you can see that there's 73% of Jews who light Shabbat candles, and this doesn't mean every Friday. For some it could, for some it might be every once in a while. But that there is still, no matter how religious or non-religious practicing you are, that a large majority of the Jewish community in some way is engaged in Jewish life. And even more so, if you look at 89% are involved in Jewish activities. And I think, again, for looking at those age demographics between Jewish kids and teens, if you are teaching a Jewish student, there is a high likelihood that in some way they are involved in the Jewish community.
I'll just add really quickly before we move to the next. So in central Indiana, there are 6 synagogues representing the breadth of religious observance. And there are 6 Jewish organizations that sort of have a built environment. There are lots of other Jewish organizations and groups of people that gather, but we have the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis, Jewish Family Services, the Jewish Community Center, Hooverwood Living, the Haston Hebrew Academy of Indianapolis, and obviously the JCRC.
So we get a nice perspective that's a little bit different than I think some of the other agencies. JCRC, because we're involved in public policy and affairs, we also get to look at the Jewish community's thoughts across the board on various issues that are important to us. And just like religious practice is and identity varies, so does issues important to the Jewish people. And so this is a recent survey that we did at the beginning of 2021 that explored where our community right now stands on some of these issues. And just going to pull out a couple of these because obviously you can read them as we talk. But I think what's really really important to note is that with criminal justice reform, the Jewish community is very strongly engaged in this and is growing in engagement. A lot of national organizations have very strong coalitions with criminal justice organizations. Immigration is another issue that is important to the Jewish community, especially if you look at our history and the need for a just and fair immigration within this country. And then if you look at the LGBTQ plus rights and inclusion, you can see that there is a wide range of support there. This is all to say that really the Jewish community in a lot of these conversations that intertwine with diversity, equity, and inclusion, the Jewish community is not just a part of them for the Jewish community, but also for other communities and people who are affected by these topics.
Yeah, thank you. Am I still muted? No. Thanks, Aaron. So we're going to move into a couple slides about anti-Semitism. In order to understand something, we need to name it. But before we get into definitions, we thought we would share how the Jewish community is actually feeling. So we were able to pull statistics from the JCRC's 21 survey, compare it to past surveys. So those are the different columns that you see. And if you let your eyes sort of start on the far right in 2003, you'll see across the board, the numbers are going up. to how Jews feel today. We were also able to pull a stat from the national Pew study that was just released, as well as ADL conducts audits of anti-Semitism. So suffice it to say, as you scan this slide, you will see that the Jewish community, members of the Jewish community, are personally experiencing anti-Semitism more considerably and with frequency, and they feel like it's increasing in just about every area. And you'll see some really major jumps in some areas, like candidates in government. So this is a concern. And it's not just how we're feeling, it's actually how it's being tracked. So I didn't throw up all of the ADL statistics. I wanted to focus in on the school statistic. So they just released their 2020, and the numbers in 2020 went down. That's a good thing. They went down because of the pandemic, because people weren't in schools, people weren't out as much. So even with the pandemic, I think 2020 is still in like the top, the highest 4 years ever recorded by ADL since over the last 50 plus years have been in the last 6 years, something like that. So we are feeling it and we are tracking it, and it is and for the JCRC, one of the things that we do is we field phone calls from parents whose kids are navigating a situation that maybe they don't know if it's anti-Semitic or it very clearly is. How does a family cope with this? JCRC has worked in every school district. There's unfortunately no school district is immune. So it's not a reflection of the student body or the faculty or the administrators. This stuff is just happening more and more. And it's increasing in K-12 schools at a faster rate than anywhere else. So what is anti-Semitism? Just wanted to make sure people could read the definitions. It may seem obvious, but it is a perception of Jews that's expressed as hatred toward Jews, or behavior that's hostile toward Jews because Jews are Jews. The thing that animates every anti-Semitic trope that I have listed on the right is some form of a conspiracy theory. We can talk more about that later if people really want to go down that rabbit hole, but we see it in the form of vandalism, words, imagery, cartoons, and obviously physical acts, and in the delegitimization of Israel. And it's happening, on property, places that are associated with Jews, synagogues or Jewish communal buildings, but mostly we're seeing it online. Social media, the internet, verbally, and on college campuses. The next couple slides are going to be a little difficult. I just want to let people know. I'm going to be showing pictures of vandalism that's taken place in Indiana over the last couple years. And then following that, I'm going to share a slide of how students have seen anti-Semitism come into their social media threads. So we all know, unfortunately, Nazi imagery when we see it. And well, I don't know how that happened. As you can see, there's no corner of Indiana that has been spared. And I know we all remember what happened up at Congregation Shari Tefillah in Carmel in 2018. So whether it's a cemetery or the site of a building or a Jewish institution, specifically a synagogue, unfortunately, it is a matter of time until we learn about something like this that's happened. And every report that we get, we verify and we share with the ADL, so it becomes part of their tracking. The next slide I'm going to share is pictures from local teens' social media over the last few years. Some of it is graphic. I'm just going to prepare you for that, but I think it's important, even for just a minute, for people to understand what's coming into the devices that our children are holding. it's very difficult there are a couple pictures here of things that have happened inside schools and became public and went global. In that case, schools that I've worked with on the whole have embraced the opportunity to treat it like a learning experience. And that's how the JCRC approaches these situations, that this is where students need to learn, understand what has happened, why symbols or activities or words are not acceptable. What's harder is when it happens on social media. It's not happening in a school, but yet the students know each other and pass each other. Presumably they'll be passing each other in halls again next year. It gets very difficult. And there's really no resolution to a situation that feels good for the student, for the family, or for the school that knows this kind of thing is happening. I'm going to move into Israel. And again, this could be an entire presentation with maps and pictures and a very vibrant conversation, but very quickly for our conversation today, as you get to understand the Jewish community living here in central Indiana, it's good for you to note that 82% of Jews in the US, that this is from Pew, say that caring about Israel is important to their Jewish identity. And in Indianapolis, almost 3/4 of Jews in Indianapolis have been to Israel at least once. And almost half of the Jewish community in Indianapolis feels as strongly about domestic policy issues as they do about what's happening in Israel. So for those of you who aren't Jewish and watching and learning today, it's important to appreciate that Judaism and Jewish identity for the overwhelming majority of Jews is very much connected to a relationship with Israel in some ways. That relationship that is incredibly diverse, just as the Jewish community is. I also wanted to take a minute to just define Zionism and a Zionist. Zionism, as you can read, is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. There's a long and beautiful history, but if you think back to the very first slide that I shared, the word Zion is used in Jewish liturgy over and over and over again, referring to Jerusalem and this place where the Israelites first established their own state, the Kingdom of Israel, before being expelled almost 2,000 years ago. I'm going to just spend one slide talking about what it means to delegitimize Israel. And as of a few days ago, this slide was not in the presentation, but the phone calls are coming in to me, and I know to my friends who have middle and high schoolers. This is how our kids are interacting with what's happening halfway around the world. And this is a really difficult conversation. And it requires care and thought and a lot of listening and a lot of learning. Jews feel connected to this tiny strip of Holy Land, but we're not the only ones to whom it's very important, and we recognize that. And as we discussed earlier, the JCRC and synagogues and Jewish organizations are very intentional about building meaningful, genuine relationships with people in other faith communities and ethnic communities. And for many people here, we have family living in Israel, just as there are members of the Muslim and local Palestinian community who have members of their family and friends living in Israel or in the Palestinian territories. So the work that we try to do, we are always focusing on what's constructive, what is additive, what words help and heal rather than hurt, and not to import the conflict into our relationships at home. Unfortunately, with social media and a whole bunch of other things, it's happening a lot where people are very quick to share and to see what's happening through social media in a black and white lens. So I just wanted to take a moment. I'm sure at this point you have read the words on the slide. There's always this question about, can I criticize Israel? And does criticizing Israel mean that somebody is anti-Semitic? And the answer is absolutely not. Israel is a democracy, and there's a healthy amount of criticism from within the Israeli community, which I didn't say on the earlier slide, by the way, is just over 20% of citizens of Israel are not Jewish. And so Israelis are Christian, Muslim, Druze, Baha'i, and Bedouin. So it's important to note that. And so criticism is absolutely fair game. And when you are trying to figure out whether criticism is crossing that line, a good question to ask yourself and somebody that you're talking to, or what you're seeing online or in the news, is the organization that's voicing criticism talking about policies, talking about decisions made by the government, by the military, by civil society, NGOs, or is the person criticizing and questioning the very existence of the state of Israel? And all of the anti-Semitic tropes that I put up earlier, unfortunately, can find purchase in anti-Israel rhetoric. So conversations around power or greed or the blood libel, can find their way into what is presented as criticism, but what is really advancing and trafficking in 1,000-year-old anti-Semitic tropes with a 21st century topic. So this is incredibly complex. Requires a lot of thought and nuance and care, but it's important that we bring it up today. And I just want to thank, again, Washington Township for giving us a little bit of space to name this, because this is what so many members of the Jewish community are experiencing right now in their social media threads. Okay, we're going to pause there. I think that Dr. Erica is going to come on and introduce another panelist and open it up for some Q&A before we share some best practices and what teachers and educators and neighbors can do to be inclusive of the Jewish community. Here she comes. Wonderful.
Greetings, and thank you, Lindsey and Aaron, for the education and opportunity this evening. My name is Dr. Erica Buchanan-Rivera, and I am the Director of Equity and Inclusion here within Washington Township. We celebrate, as mentioned, many cultural observances this month, including Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we are grateful to have this space of learning and dialogue during Jewish American Heritage Month. As mentioned, we do have a large population of Jewish families within Washington Township, and the Jewish Community Center is located within our district as well, which my family and I have visited plenty of times for some amazing family-oriented events and opportunities. We appreciate this opportunity to learn while recognizing also the sociopolitical context, as you address so well within the presentation, that impact all of us in different ways. And this is an opportunity, a prime one, to understand Jewish culture and what impacts our Jewish students, particularly those within Washington Township. So this content has been sponsored by JCRC, and now we're going to move forward into having a dialogue and hopefully answer some of your questions. We're also excited to welcome a guest panelist, a student, Madison Mundy, who will also join us in this conversation.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Maddie. You're graduating this year, correct?
Yes, I'm a senior at North Central High School right now.
Wonderful. Erica, did you want to offer some of the first questions?
historically how schools were designed. Many American schools were not designed for cultural integration. And our educational systems were often built around customs of the dominant culture. Therefore, as educators, and feel free, we love to have student perspective, how do we create affirming spaces for staff and students in general to engage with their beliefs?
Maddie, do you want to jump in? I've always got something to say, so I got to keep my mouth shut sometimes and let other people share. You want to jump in, Maddie?
Yeah, so one of the ways that I feel like it's important is kind of doing what you're doing, is acknowledging that like a lot of the systems, a lot of the activities, and just the base of our education system was based on the dominant culture of like Christianity, and mainly Protestant Christianity and like evangelicalism. So acknowledging that fact and then working around it and bringing up that conversation and allowing for other students who might be from different backgrounds or different cultures to kind of give their input and how they feel about what's going on or how their culture could be worked in as well.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Maddie, especially as we look at things as simple as social studies and history lessons. When you look at who's being named as influential people of the time or era that's being studied, and are you only focusing on certain type of people instead of uplifting others who are very pivotal in those time periods, which again, have a lot of respect for educators and how much time that can take, and sometimes that material isn't readily available. And so I think that that's also not to plug us in here, but that's also one way that JCRC beyond just these panels also can serve as resources, helping with those things. But I think really it's really important when looking at history to make sure that not only one side is being uplifted or one perspective.
And I'll just jump in, and this might be a little sore because school districts have to make lots of decisions about the courses that they offer. But one of the things that made members of the Jewish community who attend Washington Township schools and were excited about attending North Central was the opportunity to take Hebrew. And I understand that for all sorts of reasons, numbers maybe were going down, that Hebrew is not going to be offered. And that was really a space where Jewish students, and it wasn't just Jewish students, there were actually lots of students who wanted to learn Hebrew. But it was really a place where a lot of Jewish students would come together in fellowship and celebrate Jewish culture, and by the way, learn Hebrew, which is instrumental to Jewish practice, and certainly what half of all Jews on the planet speak, living in Israel. So make a little mental note about that. If Hebrew can come back quickly, I think it would make lots of Jewish students happy at North Central.
Thank you for sharing those perspectives and insights. And to build upon that, we are currently working to ensure that we have equitable practices across the district, and we're looking at that through an intersectional lens, specifically looking at religion, as a part of that. And so there is a lot of work that we acknowledge that we have to do, and it's certainly a journey. And so we have been able to devise, more so recently, as I'm looking through some of the questions in the chat, calendars that do incorporate the dates of not only Jewish holidays, but of all religiously diverse students. So we're mindful and we're conscientious of how we are scheduling things, and we're mindful of the ways in which we show up for our students, and how we encourage our students when they are embracing such special periods within their life. So thinking more about that, and feel free, Madison, to jump in. I'd love to hear, what do you think educators truly need to know about Jewish students in order to develop a cohesive learning partnership? And you named certain things already, but think about how oftentimes, and I can speak to this as a woman of color, schools may perpetuate invisibility when it comes to history and other aspects. So what exactly do you want educators to know about Jewish students in order to develop a cohesive, affirming learning partnership?
I think a good step to take would be like panels like this. I think are very important, and just like learning about Judaism on a personal level rather than an academic level. I know oftentimes when I'm learning in class, especially in social studies, when we study religion, it's like an alien race, like it's some far away thing that nobody here might be a part of or nobody here might know. And it's just making it more personal and humanizing some of the stuff. And I know that with Judaism that happens, and of course it happens with other minorities and like smaller religious groups. It's spoken of as like an other thing rather than our people in our community who we'll want to like learn about rather than others.
I think that's so well said, Maddie. And I'll just share, for those of us on this panel, I think it's safe to say we feel very comfortable talking about who we are as Jews, what we love about the Jewish community or being Jewish, our Jewish identity. I was that kid who liked being called on in class to explain a Jewish holiday. I think that that's not always the case. So it is incumbent upon the teacher to know their students, and to know and to find out ahead of time, is this something that a student would be comfortable either talking about or sharing or bringing something in. One of the programs that JCRC facilitated last year was for parents of elementary school students to encourage them. One of the slides we'll show later is this calendar of Jewish observances. And as you said, Dr. Erica, it's so wonderful that there are so many different communities that have holy days. And it would be wonderful if every school district just automatically knew them all. It's an incredible challenge. And so when I get a call from a parent that says, I can't believe there was something was scheduled on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, how does this happen? I say, well, number one, the date changes. Number two, faculty and administrators change. And number three, as members of the Jewish community, we have some agency too. We need to take that calendar into the classroom. And that can start at a very young age, where young elementary school kids can sort of share their pride of a Jewish holiday coming up and do it in a way that, doesn't, endanger any sort of church-state separation, but a sharing. And the more, young people of all faith traditions sort of step into that identity a little bit more, with a little bit more confidence, then when they get to middle school and high school, they're going to know to say something to their teacher well in advance. And parents will know to look at the calendar well in advance and make sure that educators are aware of potential conflicts. That's only half of it. It still has to be then the school to say, that was a miss. We are sorry, we're gonna name it, we're gonna acknowledge it, and we're gonna do something to rectify it. We're certainly not going to penalize students who aren't able to participate in one thing or another. And it has happened. And I think even in the Mundy family over the years, there've been, 8th grade trips or trips to DC or, things like that, where, there's only so many weeks on the calendar. We get that. And administrators are trying to pack as much as possible in, but that's, calendaring and scheduling is a huge thing that the school district can do to include the Jewish community, without a doubt.
Thank you. Aaron, anything to add to that?
I'm actually going to give, I think, a more personal anecdote about it, but being a alumni of North Central and Washington Township, I was really lucky because there's a trip called March of the Living where you get to go to see the concentration camps in Poland and then go to Israel for 5 days. And I was really lucky because that was very much encouraged by our principal at the time and my teachers. And I mean, that's a huge, it happens in the middle of the school year, and that's a huge opportunity to be able to go and experience, and encouraged a lot of my own Jewish identity and history, while being encouraged from educators who, you know, they see 2 weeks off and that's like, whoa. And so I think that's another way of really helping build space, is understanding what do these experiences outside of the classrooms help, how do they help also your students?
I appreciate these perspectives. And as we all know, as being a part of this work and being immersed specifically within inclusionary practices, you know, this is a journey, and it's about learning as well as unlearning. And based on our social construction and what we've internalized through our lived experiences, you know, it really determines how we interact and engage and see, you know, one another. So we know as humans that this is all a part of human work. And there are many things that we have to do in order to create spaces of strong connections and belongings for our students, even for the adults who are a part of our district and community. So I do appreciate this dialogue. And within Washington Township, we are truly committed to this learning and unlearning process. And we are working to give our educators the tools to engage in this learning, as well as these complex understandings, you know, about humanity, you know, as well. So thank you for this. And moving on to thinking about the parent caregiver aspect, you know, I have worked with so many different parent-based organizations throughout, you know, our district who want to embark upon a journey of being more equitable and inclusive. So in efforts to engage more community partners, you know, more families, what can our parent caregiver organizations do or think about, or who can they partner with specifically, you know, to be mindful of not just inclusion, but access and equity?
Do I see you moving in, Aaron, at all? No?
No, I was going to say,
Well, first to be, you know, fully candid, I'd love to learn more about these parent support groups. I don't think I said the word correctly, but, you know, of course, I'm going to say, you know, connecting with the JCRC is a great first step. You know, I mentioned earlier how many different Jewish organizations and synagogues there are who have wonderful professionals who will answer the phone, and, you know, 99 times out of 100 will say, yes, come visit our synagogue, or come walk the campus, come see what it is we do. But you can also just call it JCRC. We sort of position ourselves as that entryway into the Jewish community for both the Jewish community and community at large. Oftentimes, members of the Jewish community will find their way through all of those domestic policy issues, or they've had an incident in a school, or, you know, something will happen to them out in the world, and they'll be wanting to process it as a Jew and navigate it as a Jew. And we help with that. And for all of everybody else, you know, the phone call to JCRC can be us connecting a youth group with a Holocaust survivor, or with Jewish students. It's a program that I've got a slide for coming up called Student to Student, or with a member of Jewish clergy, or for a field trip, or to connect, you know, Jewish students to students from other communities as well. We do lots of community building, relationship building between Jewish students and others. So JCRC can be a first call, and then we love to brainstorm and think about ways to support families. Shall I pull up some of those other slides, the what you can do slides and ways to be inclusive?
Sure, and I think that ties into another question that you can also think about while you pull up those slides. You know, thinking about allyship, you know, specifically. You know, we have talked about some of the vulnerabilities and anti-Semitism and what can happen within a school environment, or even within the community, that can make people feel psychologically unsafe. And when thinking about allyship, we stand in solidarity with people, but how do we move in solidarity? And so how do we make that shift from allyship to co-conspiratorship within the community, within a school? So from a student perspective, what may students need from peers, from their teachers in terms of stepping up and transitioning from being just an ally to, again, an advocate, a co-conspirator? And what should we see within the community?
I really appreciate that question because, and I might fly through, there's the calendar. Everybody can download it. I'm going to talk about some of the resources that we have for teachers. But some of this, no matter what community we're talking about. And this is not, as I said at the outset, just about the Jewish community disclosing and sharing our interests and concerns. It's as much as I connect with members of the Jewish community and brainstorm ways to be co-conspirators with other communities. It starts with listening. It starts with asking questions. And once you start asking questions, people will be more likely, I think, to ask you questions. And then you'll think about how you're answering them. Are you answering somebody's questions in a way that invites another and another, and that actually builds understanding and empathy? And I think there's a lot of talking these days, and there's a lot of learning and growing and unlearning, like you said, and that happens. I think it needs to happen all around the horn, like it is for a young Jew who's figuring out who he or she or they are, how they feel about something. Their feelings might change, and they might not be able to articulate why something doesn't feel right and why something does also. And I think that's one of the hardest things to sort of watch. I've got a 6th and 8th grader right now, and they have a mom who's a professional in the Jewish community. Their identity as Jews should be sort of like, set. But I see them also struggle with understanding why certain spaces don't seem friendly right now. Why certain conversations, they feel like they need to stop and walk away. It can get very difficult. So I think humility, listening, acknowledging that somebody may be having an experience that they can't quite articulate why it doesn't feel right, but it just does, and then still honoring that and saying, okay, that's how you've experienced this interaction, that cartoon, that meme, that comment. We might not be able to unpack it all, we're not academics who can, talk about the history, but if this is how you're feeling, I'm going to honor that right now, and respect that. And then as I speak to my kids, I ask them to do the same of others, and to recognize that very few things are just one thing. People are not one thing. Things that are happening around the world are not just one thing. As much as we want to, as much as we all in many ways work toward building this just society, which is part of JCRC's mission, we also recognize that this is hard work and long work and complex work. And so recognizing somebody's perspective, that there's a narrative, that there's a bias. I have one, everybody does. And then thinking about, what is actually constructive? What builds this relationship? What gets us closer to justice? What gets us closer to greater understanding and empathy? So we see the humanity in each other. I think that's basic across the board, and certainly holds true for members of the Jewish community as well.
Madison, it looked like you had something earlier.
I'd love to hear from you, Madison. And thank you, Lindsey. That was powerful.
I think one of the biggest things for kind of working with your Jewish students or the Jewish community would be like understanding and flexibility. I know it was brought up in the chat about and earlier, like with scheduling and everything. Even I get confused every year about the schedules, but I think it's very important for especially teachers and administrators to be flexible with scheduling and like having to take time off for various reasons, and just understanding that it's necessary for us, and it's just being flexible about that. I think that's a very big thing.
Yeah, thank you. And then I think I'll wrap up this last question, which in Madison, actually what you just said also made me think that it's one thing for one student to feel a type of way, but it's another to stand together. So if you see something that might be making whether they're Jewish, gay, Black, Muslim student, one of your fellow students feel unsafe or unheard, to stand with them and to be a partner in addressing that issue, and while doing that, not speaking over them, following their lead, listening to them. I think it's really important that when we are in this space of building allyship to co-conspiratorship, that you're not speaking over and taking and causing unintentional harm. And then I think with the reality of where we sit, kind of taking it out to the community perspective, that right now we're seeing, unfortunately, in our community, attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And I think that as much as we need to stand with individual members and individual communities, we also need to stand with schools and organizations and others who are really trying to reconcile with some pain within our communities and our country and our institutions. And so I think it's really, really important that as community organizations that we stand with schools like Washington Township that are really investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Beautiful way to wrap it up, Aaron.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm seeing the time too, and I'd love to just share a couple things for any educators that are on. There are lots of ways that the JCRC can help, because teachers do so much and have just so much to do, and so we present it on a platter. It's enough, I'll just say, visit our website, but we have classroom resources. We also have lots of professional development that we do over the summer. It's really primary based sourced, teaching about Judaism and Jewish history and anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. And really something that we're super proud of is this program called Student to Student, where students like Maddie are trained to go in groups of 3 or 4 into classrooms where there isn't a Jewish presence, which is most of them, and talk about what it's like to be Jewish. And it's a student to student conversation. And so it breaks down barriers. It's a diverse group of Jewish students standing at the front of the classroom, and it unotherizes Jews. And there hasn't been a teacher who hasn't said, I'd love for student to student to come back into my classroom next semester. So if you want to learn more, please check out our website.
Thank you again for this opportunity. We are beyond excited to just have you join us and provide this education and opportunity. I just want to also emphasize to families who may have asked questions regarding our own procedures within Washington Township, we do have policies, we have practices and ways of reporting discrimination. So I want everyone to be educated on those processes. So if you go to our website and you look at our diversity, equity, inclusion page, you should see links for reporting harassment as well as discrimination. And we're also immersed in a lot of proactive work. We have a district equity leadership team that is talking heavily about culturally responsive teaching practices within classroom environments. We have a resiliency team within our district leadership team and within all of our buildings that are working to help cultivate skills where teachers are developing a critical consciousness while working with students. And all of that work is important. We have social emotional learning. So we're helping students to have a keen sense of awareness when it comes to their identity and the ways in which they navigate school environments to build a cohesive and a community that is inclusive. So we're just welcoming of all of the practices that help to strengthen, the pedagogy that we see within school environments. We thank you for being a part of this enriched discussion. And we are working hard, collectively, because we're stronger together, to build spaces of belonging where, all of our students are proud to reside with here in Washington Township. So I thank our student panelists for being here. Madison, that was great. I loved hearing your perspectives, and we are looking forward to creating more student advocacy spaces in the future, as well as affinity spaces, because we do think it's important for students to have safe spaces to have these type of dialogues within a school setting. So I appreciate all the work that you do, and thank you for being here.
Thank you again, Washington Township, for the invitation. It was a pleasure, and it can be the first of many conversations that we have. For anybody who wants to unpack any of the stuff that we talked about, find us online. We're happy to. We have a great professional team, and we have really fabulous young people like Madison who are also connecting with peers about what it's like to be Jewish today. So thank you. It was really fun.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.